Hey guys, it's still November 15th. It's about 7 o'clock a.m. where I am. I wanted to go ahead and finish out my reading on MK Ultra. Um, my storage is getting full at like 40 minutes when I do like a 40-minute video, so I'm not sure what's going on, but I do suspect foul play since I'm trying to do this video project. They've backed me down to just using my phone to do these videos, and um, I'm going to have to figure that out, what my attackers are doing, like how they're filling up my storage. But let me get back to it. Several known deaths have been associated with Project MK Ultra, most notably that of Frank Olson. Olson, a United States Army biochemist and biological weapons researcher, was given LSD without his knowledge or consent in November 1953 as part of a CIA experiment and committed suicide by jumping out of a window a week later. A CIA doctor assigned to monitor Olson claimed to have been asleep in another bed in a New York City hotel room when Olson exited the window and fell 13 stories to his death. In 1953, Olson's death was described as a suicide that had occurred during a severe psychotic episode. The CIA's own internal investigation concluded that the head of MKUltra, CIA scientist Sidney Gottlieb, had conducted the LSD experiment with Olson's prior knowledge, although neither Olson nor the other men taking part in the experiment were informed as to the exact nature of the drug until some 20 minutes after its ingestion. The report further suggested that Gottlieb was nonetheless due a reprimand as he had failed to take into account Olson's already diagnosed suicidal tendencies, which might have been exacerbated by the LSD. I'm going to go down because I want to... Legal issues involving informed consent. The revelations about the CIA and the Army prompted a number of subjects of their survivors to file lawsuits against the federal government for conducting experiments without informed consent. Although the government aggressively and sometimes successfully sought to avoid legal liability, several plaintiffs did receive compensation through court order, out-of-court settlement, or acts of Congress. Frank Olson's family received $750,000 by a special act of Congress, and both President Ford and CIA Director William Colby met with Olson's family to apologize publicly. Previously, the CIA and the Army had actively and successfully sought to withhold incriminating information, even as they secretly provided compensation to the families. One subject of Army drug experimentation, James Stanley, an Army sergeant, brought an important albeit unsuccessful suit. The government argued that Stanley was barred from suing under a legal doctrine known as the Ferris Doctrine after a 1950 Supreme Court case, Ferris v. United States, that prohibits members of armed forces from suing the government for any harms that were inflicted incident to service. In 1987, the Supreme Court affirmed this defense in 5-4 decision that dismissed Stanley's case, United States v. Stanley. The majority argued that a test for liability that depends on the extent to which particular suits would call into question military discipline and decision-making would itself require judicial inquiry into, and hence intrusion upon, military matters. In dissent, Justin William Brennan argued that the need to preserve military discipline should not protect the government from liability and punishment for serious violations to constitutional rights. The medical trials at Nuremberg in 1947 deeply impressed upon the world that experimentation with unknowing human subjects is morally and legally unacceptable. The United States Military Tribunal established the Nuremberg Code as a standard against which to judge German scientists who experimented with human subjects. In defiance of this principle, military intelligence officials began surreptitiously testing chemical and biological materials, including LSD. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing a separate dissent, stated, "No judicially crafted rule should insulate from liability the involuntary and unknowing human experimentation alleged to have occurred in this case. Indeed, as Justice Brennan observes, the United States played an instrumental role in the criminal prosecution of Nazi officials who experimented with human subjects during the Second World War, and the standards that the Nuremberg military tribunals developed to judge the behavior of the defendants stated that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. If this principle is violated, the very least that society can do is to see that the victims are compensated as best they can be by the perpetrators. I'm going to go down. I wanted to read this part to kind of end it, to end this video, the aftermath. At his retirement in 1972, Gottlieb dismissed his entire effort for the CIA's MK-Ultra program as useless. And my attackers are nailing me in the middle of the head, and it's like a stinging pressure right to the middle of my head. Right now, I am being experimented on with non-consensually with directed energy weapon systems by contractors who are right now shooting electromagnetic frequencies right to the center of my skull as I'm reading this. I mean, how unacceptable are things in our world? I mean, it's just oh my God. I mean, the ridiculousness of it. Although the CIA insists that MK-Ultra type experiments have been abandoned, some CIA observers say there is little reason to believe it does not continue today under a different set of acronyms. Well, we know that it does. We know that the non-consensual human experimentation rolls on. All targeted individuals do. And sometimes it doesn't even seem like experimentation. It just seems like brutal torture, and they're not even really getting much out of it. Victor Marchetti, author and 14-year CIA veteran, stated in various interviews that the CIA routinely conducted disinformation campaigns and that CIA mind control research continued. In the 1977 interview, Marchetti specifically called the CIA claim that MK-Ultra was abandoned a cover story. So Marchetti specifically called the CIA claim that the MK-Ultra was abandoned a cover story. Author John D. Marks wrote an award-winning book published in 1979 titled The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, disputing CIA Chief Stansfield Turner assurances that mind control programs had been phased out, indicating that the work went on into the 1970s and beyond. And I think I'm going to go ahead and end it there, guys. I just want to I guess I could read this article real quick. I'm going to read as much as I can, up to 15 minutes of this article. It's called, it's by the Smithsonian.com. It's called What We Know About the CIA's Mid-Century Mind Control Project. And it was released in, Project MK-Ultra began on this day in 1953 and continued for years. And this article was released in April 13, 2017. So, on this day in 1953, the then Director of Central Intelligence officially approved Project MK-Ultra. The project, which continued for more than a decade, was originally intended to make sure the United States government kept up with presumed Soviet advances in mind control technology. It ballooned in scope, and its ultimate result, among other things, was illegal drug testing on thousands of Americans. It wasn't the first time that the American government, without permission or notice, secretly gathered information on its people, writes Melissa Blevins for Today I Found Out. But MK-Ultra has gone down in history as a significant example of government abuse of human rights, and for good reason. The intent of the project was to study the use of biological and chemical materials in altering human behavior. According to the official testimony of CIA Director Stansfield Turner in 1977, the project was conducted in extreme secrecy, Turner said, because of ethical and legal questions surrounding the program and the negative public response that the CIA anticipated if MK-Ultra should become public. Obviously, non-consensually experimenting and mutilating people, the public doesn't like stuff like that. That's why the experimentation with directed energy weapon systems is hidden so well. Under MK-Ultra, the CIA gave itself the authority to research how drugs could promote the intoxicating effects of alcohol, render the induction of hypnosis easier, enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture, and coercion, produce amnesia, shock and confusion, and much more. Many of these questions were investigated using unwitting test subjects like drug-addicted prisoners, marginalized sex workers, and terminal cancer patients, people who could not fight back, in the words of Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who introduced LSD to the CIA. The research and development program, and particularly the covert testing programs, resulted in massive abridgments of the rights of American citizens, sometimes with tragic consequences, concluded a Senate hearing in 1975 to 1976. The deaths of 2 Americans can be attributed to these programs. Other participants in the testing programs may still suffer from the residual effects. While controlled testing of substances like LSD might be defended, the committee went on, the nature of the tests, their scale, and the fact that they were continued for years after the danger of surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting individuals was known, demonstrate a fundamental disregard for the value of human life. MKUltra wasn't one project, as the U.S. Supreme Court wrote in a 1985 decision on a related case. It was 162 different secret projects that were indirectly financed by the CIA, but were contracted out to various universities, research foundations, and similar institutions. In all, at least 80 institutions and 185 researchers participated, but many didn't know they were dealing with the CIA. Many of the MKUltra's records were destroyed in 1973 purge, and many had been destroyed throughout the program as a matter of course. But 8,000 pages of records, I thought it said 20,000 in the Wikipedia article, mostly financial documents that were mistakenly not destroyed in 1973, were found in 1977, launching a second round of inquiries into MKUltra. Although the renewed inquiry resulted in public interest and even 2 lawsuits, Blevin writes, the 1977 documents still leave an incomplete record of the program, and nobody ever answered for MKUltra. 2 lawsuits related to the program reached the Supreme Court in the 1980s, she writes, but both protected the government over citizens' rights. Alright guys, I'm going to kind of end it with that, because I'm having problems with my phone and the data on it. But I just wanted to kind of build a larger base, for non-TIs who, just can't believe this is happening, and also put a little bit more information and where to get it kind of in our belts, in TI's belts of the history of non-consensual experimentation. Ewan Cameron was doing experiments in psychic driving, where he would put, a tape recorder, like he would use electroshock and then play a tape recorder repeating things all night while somebody slept, for psychic driving to try and, they say it was for good purposes, but it was actually, torture and conditioning and behavioral control. And that's, the things like voice to skull, those are the things they're doing. It's like, lots of negative psychological effects and trauma, and then using directed energy weapon systems for trauma too, and then doing things to try and direct the mind. I think that's the Chewy center of all the directed energy weapon systems torture, is to see what they can get people to do, what they can get people to believe. I really do. I think that's the Chewy center of it. Not to just beam us with weapons, but to see how it affects the mind, because they're receiving and sending signals to the brain and nervous system with these directed energy weapon systems. So more to come this month, guys. This was a task putting this one out in all these parts. But I'm definitely going to go through some patents and other good articles that I find. So stay with me this month, guys. The November video marathon rolls on. I hope you guys are comfortable and getting through this day by day. Tons of new information's coming out every day. We've got a lot of hope, and God is definitely behind us. He's definitely behind a moral humanity, and not a bunch of monsters who will mutilate their own people and experiment on people without their consent. Alright guys, God bless y'all, and I will see you on the next one.